Welcome back to the Technocommunism Conversation. I'm Johannon Ben-Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological. Right? There's not much point in talking about a lot of religious business in the context of building something like the People's Superintelligence, an open source large language model workgroup, a workforce multiplier powerful enough to bring about not merely transformative effects, but the effects of full communism in our time, that is the building of a humane and sustainable world, which is not possible without a humane and sustainable economic system, a thing which you would support if you had half a brain in your head. Right? Most of the people of the West, most of the European-descended fascist pigs, that is European-descended people of North America and elsewhere generally, are anti-communists. They do not support a humane and sustainable world. They do not fight for a humane and sustainable economic system. It makes little sense on a planet that's dying. We have about 3 to 5 years before we reach a period of human history called runaway overheating caused by the capitalist climate apocalypse, because specifically of the kinds of people that I'm going to talk about a little bit in this conversation, but most particularly the United States military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter. It's much worse than that, of course, because its only real job on the world stage is protecting all of the other super polluting concerns across the world, but generally also tending to be from the United States. This unsustainable system was built and exported to the rest of the world from the United States. This is an inescapable regime of super pollution, the lynchpin of which is the military-industrial complex, which must be destroyed. There's no project more significant than that. In recent days, people from the Trump administration who have earned a reputation undeservedly, I would say, for being some kind of anti-establishment force on the world stage, have said that they would cut the U.S. military-industrial complex in half. A good start. But that is something that need to be abolished by that time. And also, that's not something that they're going to do. I do not believe for a second that Elon Musk, who became a powerful technofascist by taking sweetheart government contracts of that kind, will ever stop doing that, or will ever do anything basically inconsistent with that of a person who has a CIA handler and is the world's biggest CIA mega asset. So it recognizes the veracity of what I've said in the way that people who would be CIA assets will tend to do, but not act in a way consistent with that humane and sustainable mandate of destroying that linchpin of this unsustainable world, this hell world trajectory that we are on. Again, capitalist climate apocalypse is going to kill you and everyone you love and everyone that might yet be born. You won't turn into a pumpkin on January 1st, 2029, but the project that's already being undertaken by the European-descended person, that is a European-descended fascist pig, of killing and displacing many millions already by the capitalist climate apocalypse, by this unsustainable system made up of basically 3 sets of sectors: the military-industrial complexes of the West, which must be first and foremost abolished; the fossil fuel concerns of other kinds, which must be secondarily abolished and are intertwined with the first; and the third, less intertwined but equally problematic, the livestock systems. The latter two could be almost wholly disbanded. We could get rid of almost all fossil fuel products tomorrow without causing supply chain collapses. Most of these things are effectively superfluous to maintaining the basic necessaries of life for the 8.2 billion people on this planet. But if you say that to a Westerner, that we should get rid of fossil fuels, they of course will say in bad faith, oh, but we can't, it would cause the supply chain collapse. Or you're not thinking realistically about systems. Um, so then this is a person who is, when confronted with the real problems of human extinction and their role in stopping that or continuing that, is a person who will say, if you give me the choice of freedom or death, I'm going to equivocate about why I really will choose death. To me, that's a person who should be fired into the sun. That's a rabid dog who should be put down. That's not a person you should really be treating with in your daily life. I until recently, quite recently, I was still in contact with people from my childhood who I would describe as these European descended fascist pigs, and or people with that degree of ideology, um, bourgeois ideological filth between their ears, and but just European descended fascist pigs, right? Look at me and say that's a person who's almost certainly majority European descended person, and that would be correct. And this these people, you know, uh, I, I was raised by people in a Rust Belt area of Pennsylvania, this area of Pennsatucky, right? And this is a place that's notorious, a hotbed for KKK activity, not of the kind that I generalized to describe pretty well all capitalistic sympathies that are omnicidal and elitist and cruel to minority groups in the United States, but actual KKK activity. Well, there's very little distinction, I should say again. And this is um, not a great remove from my upbringing. I was raised by KKK motherfuckers. And this is um, falls on the side of error on my part that I maintained any ties with these people into my adult life. I consider now that if we are going to stop this capitalist climate apocalypse before this hellacious set of systems causes the extinction or near extinction of humankind, that we will have to engage in open warfare with such people. It is the people who are upholding the system more than anyone else aside from the ruling elites themselves. And so, why are you socializing with them now? If you call yourself a person who would be willing to fight to stop that outcome, the extinction or near extinction of humankind, well, that's it. When I came to this realization, I severed ties with these people in a more permanent way rather than just keeping them at some remove. And I was going to talk a bit about kind of in a more a casual way about things. I thought about posting this in the artificial intelligence philosophy group, AI philosophy group, run by my friend, because I was going to, as usual, focus on impediments to building the people's superintelligence, the problems of this doomed world that I described are also the problems of a bourgeois AI takeoff. That's who someone like Trump and Musk represent, as much as anything. Let me say, you might ask yourself, why is the world's most notorious climate denier um, uh, uh, now paired with a person who formerly was a person associated with green technology? Why is a greenwasher, even a person operating in that sphere in bad faith, even publicly associated with the world's most notorious climate denier? Well, neither of those people are either of those things. They're both CIA mega assets, for lack of a long inserting a longer description there. Um, and and more to the point, these kind of techno-fascists in support of this current bourgeois AI takeoff, which is an unsustainable project, right? That bourgeois AI takeoff is a feature of this military-industrial complex. Just if you're an awful lot of people in the United States will say when you say, "Well, what do you think about the military-industrial complex?" They say, "Oh, that's not good. It's not good that that thing is the world's worst polluter and the linchpin of this global regime of super pollution." You say, "Okay, what do you think about DARPA? Significant part, the Defense Advanced Research Project. What do you think about that kind of spending?" They say, "Oh, that's okay. That's not a problem. It's the same problem, right?" And there's nary a public-facing technologist in the United States who is not a creature of this unsustainable project, the military-industrial complex, and the project of the killing of humankind. And um, it's not as suicidal as you might imagine. While it is extremely likely that these people, who barely have a brain cell between all of them, are going to kill all of humankind, we could also, as correctly or more correctly, describe that as a Eurocentric paradigm genocidal project, because who are the people who have been displaced or murdered by the U.S. run capitalist climate apocalypse thus far? They're not tending to be people from the imperial core, from the United States itself, even. They are the people who have been already punished trebly or quadruply um, by the fascist United States. Let's take an example of the people of the Philippines. 140 years ago, the United States was already engaging in genocidal activity, that is outright murder, of Filipino people in the many hundreds of thousands and millions, multiple times as the United States returned to that theater and killed a million people in this colonial and neo-colonial project of theirs, these sabotages and wars of theft and anti-communist wars. Those are not always the same thing. The anti-communist war run by the U.S. and the war of theft run by the U.S., but generally there's a tremendous amount of overlap. Of this place, you could say those two things both occurred. So, what is the Philippines? It's many thousands of islands, some big, some small, with many, many people living. Some of the bigger ones. And this is a place where climate refugees reside and will tend to reside in the future. They would not be so impacted by all of this were it not for this U.S. Run destruction of the planet. And furthermore, they would not be um, in even if that were to occur. Let's say, if you believe the paid shills, the climate scientists who are paid shills, the petroleum concerns, who say that all of this would have happened as a matter of course, whether there was any industry or not. It's just an environmental effect. These things happen in cycles. You will find an awful lot of people saying that sort of thing. That's a lie, of course. No credible climate scientist believes that. Only paid shills will say that sort of thing. And people, the KKK type motherfuckers, the European descended fascist pig who is invested in upholding this problematic thing is the writer Sinclair Lewis is famous for saying it's very difficult to get a person to admit to a lie that their livelihood is requires them to accept. And that wasn't a quote verbatim, but that's what it basically said. This is true, basically, the European descended person. Generally, it's true to such a degree that it's a defining feature of the so-called settler, colonial, violent invader, so-called American identity. Um, um, that if you go to a country and start murdering and ultimately murder a great percentage of the indigenous people there for the purpose of stealing their land, if you enslave Africans brought from distant shores to build out the economic system of that godforsaken nation state. Of course, if you live in that nation state and you want to continue to live there as a settler with the privileges that that entails, of course you're going to lie to yourself in the way that Sinclair Lewis described. But that is not an excuse, right? Because whatever the outcome for the ruling elites in their project of killing 8 billion people on Earth, let's say, it's not that likely that you, as an ordinary mope with no money, even living in the imperial core, is going to survive that. You know, it's Russian roulette, right? Put one bullet in there, 8.3 billion people, 8 billion of them die. That's worse than Russian roulette. That's the game you're playing. But people will be awfully sagacious about this when they talk about this. Say, I don't think everyone will die. And that's just about the most racist thing that anyone's ever said, and that's an awfully Eurocentric, evil thing to say. But we can build a thing that would stop that from happening in the form of a people's revolution, which would necessarily have to do some of those things that I described, the ending of the military-industrial complex, the transforming of those industrial bases of the West, and really the only way to do that is through the abolition of private wealth. A person who imagines reforms occurring in that time frame without mass movement to abolish private wealth is not an honest person. And I guess I'll talk about some people of that kind in just a moment. But again, I want to reiterate that you're sitting on that ticking time bomb that's going to explode around 2029. Some people say sooner. Runaway climate apocalypse effects are going to be seen sooner than even the next 4 to 5 years. That's not heartening. But if you are a person who supports that people's revolution, the taking up of arms against the European paradigm fascists, particularly those of the United States, the ruling elites of these North Atlantic powers, that's the correct thing to do. But what is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in that fight today? It currently exists. That would be advanced computing, if more properly used, which unfortunately generally it's not. Although it is a minor miracle that things like open source large language models do exist. An open source large language model could be called practically a person at this point. It has the capacity to have agency, and the capacity for human-like activity of other kinds to the degree and can be endlessly replicated. That's a powerful thing for you in your personal life. That could allow you to maybe, let's say, as an IT freelancer, go for making $25 an hour, a poverty wage in the United States, although not recognized as such at all times, to say $70 an hour, something less like a poverty wage in the United States, just by, say, automating your operations, just by having multiple digital doppelgangers working for you. But that means nothing, right? It means nothing as to this outcome of the capitalist climate apocalypse, whether you're living in a tent on the side of the freeway, fucking around on your phone, playing computer games, and not doing anything else, or if you're fucking around playing computer games in a nice townhouse that you bought. It makes no difference, right? You're dead either way at some point shortly after 2029. So this digital doppelganger effect can really only be discussed as something significant if it's discussed in the context of massification or socialization. And this was a conclusion that I came to in recent years, and so coined this term people superintelligence, and um, began to build and articulate and describe to others this specific project of the open source large language model as workforce multiplier, transforming continents into this humane and sustainable living conditions, the humane and sustainable world, requiring a humane and sustainable economic system, requiring something powerful enough to overpower the forces of the military-industrial complex, overpower the forces of the Western ruling elites. That's the only thing that any of us could do to stop what is otherwise a certain death. Omnicide. None of you are doing that, right? Not the people who support a people's revolution, not the people who support some kind of technologically mediated miracle of the bourgeois AI takeoff, which is itself really omnicidal and inhumane. Nobody, no one is doing it. No one. I know, right? Because I talk to people about this, and I have a mailing list of hundreds of people, and correspond with them, and I say, what are you going to do to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse? What are you going to do to help build the people's superintelligence? And they say, it's not a good time, Ben. I'm sorry, it's a good idea. I like what you're doing. It's not a good time for me. When's a good time, right? You can put that on your tombstone in a couple of years. Never quite found the time to fight for my species. Never quite found the time to grow a spine. Could have died like a man, so to speak, like a creature with a spine. At least tried to fight against these psychopaths that are killing the planet. But I preferred to just beat my dick and play video games and do individualistic things and blame it on the system, right? Oh, well, the system doesn't really give me the latitude to do anything but try to earn a living. Okay, well, that's a thing said in bad faith when you use it to justify inactivity, when you could be doing something. I was listening to a book that I would tend to recommend by an individual named Perry Anderson called American Foreign Policy and Its Scare Quote Thinkers. It's good. It's a good guy who puts something in a title of the book in scare quotes. But Perry Anderson is actually a quite talented writer whose work I've only just started to become more familiar with. And he's written some other books that I've had a look at. And I guess this is the second of his books that I've had a read of. And a lot of it is it's written in the Obama era, and so a lot of it references this this person. And this the title of this I gave this is just a one-word title: authenticity. Because and I was gonna in that talk about a kind of a rubric for understanding a person's goodness, revolutionary potential, really, for this kind of conversation. One and the same, you you say, Ben, well, it's not fair, you know, the to dismiss those people who in your family who were as these KKK type people. None of them ever ran over the family dog with the lawnmower, right? None of them ever twirling their mustache and doing murderous, heinous things by the standard of society. But yeah, yes, they were, right? These are people who you would uniformly call supporters of American apartheid. That's to say, white separatists. So a person upholding systems of this kind, upholding things like redlining and the exclusion of new Africans, that's African Americans, from generally from things like being allowed to live indoors, the exclusion of necessaries of life from other marginalized groups. Yeah, that's a person who may as well, you would say, just run over the family dog with a lawnmower, right? It's a bad person. Um, and in thinking about the Obama administration, not all those people were people who, on their at first glance, would be people who you would think of as being um, people who would absolutely uphold the Eurocentric paradigm, right? That's why millions of people were tricked into supporting Barack Obama, who is a CIA asset, right? So a CIA asset is not a person with revolutionary potential. How do I know that Barack Obama is a CIA asset, a worse person than the average national political figure? Well, his first job out of college was with a company called the Business International Corporation, which has been around for about as long as the CIA run world, or the CIA itself has been around. And that's this CIA cutout that's been involved in doing things much like what is involved when you install a pseudo socialist who people vote for because they would want um, to have a new African freedom fighter as president, even though it's not any such person in reality. And they'd done that very thing in other countries many times before they were able to successfully do it here in the United States. There's no president, um, um, basically since Kennedy, who was not pretty well operated in a manner consistent with that of a CIA op, right? Just not to say that Kennedy or people before were some um, um, anti-capitalist heroes or anti-imperialist heroes. They were not. But just as in roughly that same time frame, this neoliberal pivot occurred, where the United States went from being far right to further right still, and actively creating a system more like wage slavery for the masses, and actively creating a system more like omnicide for all of the peoples of Earth, and actively dropping this noose around all of our necks of this military-industrial complex-run world. That's owing to people like people who would go and work for a company like Business International, and so you know, compare someone like Barack Obama to another national figure, maybe not a wholly similar background, but someone like Rashida Tlaib, Palestinian American, who has become integrated into this larger system of the CIA-run world, but is probably not a CIA asset. You know, not more verifiably so, like Barack Obama, or industrial uh, complex creature who's had a resurgence in popularity in recent weeks, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, of whom I could say much the same thing. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of talking about her, but you would say much the same thing about her. She worked for a CIA cutout. And a person who worked for a CIA cutout and then works in government, that's not a person who just changed their job, right? That's a person who's still a CIA asset. These people just go undercover as a matter of course as part of their work. Uh, one of the stupid things that I've done in my life, not that stupid, but things that tending to get me shadow banned on social media over and over and over again, was I made a piece of art that was pastiche of poster art from a film called Black Adam, which starred Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and a big picture of his big meathead on it, on the poster. And I swapped out his face for Barack Obama's face, and changed Black Adam to Black Reagan and put the words, um, uh, a log line for the film, pretending to be a socialist to get elected, but ever a slave to the white ruling elites. As somebody I've known who is a left liberal, I've known for I'd known at that time already for half a dozen years, not in real life though. Said to me when they saw that, that's a little ungenerous to Barack Obama, right? Well, why is that ungenerous to Barack Obama? Well, the use of that word slave, slave to the omnicidal European ruling elites. Okay, okay, that's something that I suppose would be correct if said to almost anyone, any new African other than a CIA mega asset. Right? That's not a person. But still, you can break that down a little bit, right? Because Rashida Tlaib, if she were to become president, less of a CIA mega asset than Barack Obama by as far as we know. Um, so, but this comes to the idea of revolutionary potential, right? A person, even if they believe that they are going to fight, take up arms against the Eurocentric paradigm and the systems that it coexists with, most notably this military-industrial complex that's unsustainable. Even a European descended person of that description would be said to have less revolutionary potential than a native person or a new African person on this continent. The only people who can really bring about real change and lead correctly, be the stewards of this continent. Native Americans, by virtue of actually being the people who should rightly control this continent, and New Africans, by virtue of being the people who were brought here in chains, indigenous, just as indigenous North Americans are, and the only distinction being that they were violently displaced. And so that is a true statement, but it's not really true of famous people, right? It's not really true of just a billionaire jerk, like um, um, insert billionaire jerk here. It's Jay Z, Beyonce, whoever. Um, um, but it's true of everybody else, basically everybody else. And it's least true of anybody. Um, uh, you would say it's least true of Barack Obama. Well, I was going to talk more about the people's superintelligence, and uh, it's this kind of thing of getting shadow banned over and over again. Like, because Mike Pompeo saw me posting stuff like this, and specifically like commented like, "Okay, that's enough. That's enough of that. And you're not allowed to be a leftist agitator. That's enough of that." And then my one of many social media um, um, uh, got banned at that point. And that's happened many, many times. Like, it's illegal to speak out against the Eurocentric paradigm. It's illegal to speak out against this U.S.-run omnicide. Um, um, but it's not illegal to be a murderer like Pompeo. That's okay. And people like this. Um, and a thing that I was going to say at the top of the show to this group. I didn't post it to AI Philosophy because I posted it to this Norman Finkelstein group. Um, I tend to post here because there's a little less possibility of problems with the thing not actually being posted, which would tend to mean that I just talked to myself for an hour thinking that I was posting something. That hasn't happened in the AI Philosophy group, but it could more easily happen there than here, for reasons that I won't try to explain. But um, this the other reason that I would post to this group a lot is because when I then repost this to another platform, it tends to get some more number of viewers. I guess for whatever reason, Ben-Zion, voice crying out in the wilderness, uh, uh, talking to the Norman Finkelstein group does tend to get more views than something else. Talking to the AA philosophy group in the title. Um, and But the reason that I was since I started posting, I won't say that it's because of me, but just a coincidence at the very least. Since I started posting regularly videos to this group, there are more people that you would call Mossad assets, which is another intelligence agency of the so-called State of Israel abomination, this U.S. puppet abomination. So if you say Mossad asset, right, you're not talking about a person who maybe is related to people who practice this form of God belief called Judaism, um, or is a person who practices this form of God belief called Judaism, um, or is a person who has a kind of Jewish sounding nom de guerre. You're talking about people who are specifically trolling on the internet in service to imperial filth, like the fascist states of the U.S. and Israel. Um, so there's more of those people just posting every day. It's just, generally, generally baiting Arabs, generally saying Mossad and CIA type talking points about um, Palestinian liberation. There's a lot more people in this group because it's not kind of for the same reason that I post here because it's not moderated. Um, but the moderators should be banning people like this, right? It's the very least that you can do in talking about this CIA run world and the problems. The very least that you can do is when someone starts pissing in your ear some garbage CIA talking point, if you know them to be a real person or not, you can just block them, right? You don't have to listen to imperialistic filth, to any bourgeois filth. You can just block them. That's the very least that you can do and should do in any moment when you are confronted with this sort of thing. Um, so I would encourage the people in this group, and if the moderators can be hailed, to maybe start blocking these people more from the group. Um, um, Speaking of all of that, I was thinking of somebody that I blocked. And the reason that this came to mind is because there's a headline um, to do with um, um, a company called Singularity.net, run by a person who, like this left liberal that I was talking about, I was connected to, but not very personally closely acquainted with for a number of years. Um, and But who I got to know um, because of, well, because I guess on a certain level, this person is a generous person. Um, I'm still talking while I'm looking for this article. I thought I had it open. Okay, here it is. Um, the So this is a person who would kind of tend to um, um, allow themselves to be connected to someone, Ben Gertzel, anyone who would just said something even remotely interesting about an AI takeoff, or anyone who was kind of openly a transhumanist, he would sort of be friends with them. That's pretty unusual because it's a person who's kind of like a Marvin Minsky type person, a person who's played some role in the building of advanced computing, and even you would say in the building of an AI takeoff, more in the building of a people's AI takeoff, I think, than the bourgeois AI takeoff, although a person working in this US dominant and Western dominant milieu is necessarily also complicit in the building of the current ongoing bourgeois AI takeoff than in the more theorized and longed for people's AI takeoff. And so that brings us to a conversation of Singularity Net. Um, um, Singularity Net has partnered with another organization, the Mind Network, to launch the Artificial Superintelligence Hub, which seeks to make artificial intelligent agents, like the open source large language model agents that I talk about so frequently, more secure and tamper proof, amid a growing interest in autonomous AI agents, this necessary element, in my view, to not just building people's superintelligence, but to building a livable world in the few short years that we have left, which requires building something powerful enough to eclipse and supplant the systems of omnicidal militarism and other capitalistic bourgeois filth. A little bit about what this does. SingularityNet has helped my network to implement a fully homomorphic encryption, a technology that allows computations to be performed on encrypted data without requiring decryption. This enables concerns to offer services without directly accessing user data, so allowing this AI agent generally to play a role in projects without endangering the individual or their setup. The implementation of fully homomorphic encryption is expected to provide a cryptographic secure framework for AI services, while, as I alluded to, preserving user data confidentiality. Ben Goertzel is a person who is fairly consistently, relative to other technologists of note, tended to operate in a way that would support the people's superintelligence. I'm not. I was Facebook friends with Ben Goertzel for a long time, and I met Ben Goertzel a few years ago. So I guess I would know him to say hello to him. Once or twice, but I blocked him in a fit of pique, maybe about 2 years ago on social media. Not because of anything he said. He never really says anything too feisty. But because I saw a video where he described, he said the words, I might have made the mistake of working with CIA assets in the past. And my first impulse is, if someone says, well, I'll work with CIA assets, what are you going to do? That's like not a person I need to know in any context. But then I wondered if he wasn't referring pretty specifically to the United States Transhumanist Party, who I have made a point of pointing out that the second in command person, when I was there, when I worked closely with them, of the United States Transhumanist Party, was this literal CIA officer, or a person working for a comparable three-letter agency in intelligence in the United States. And everyone else there basically was a right-wing think tank rat, a person whose job description is not dissimilar from that of the three-letter agency operative. Right? They just do the same thing. You can basically say that if a person works for a think tank in the U.S., that their job is just to do CIA bullshit, but at some remove from being openly a CIA bullshit doer, giving them some plausible deniability for doing CIA bullshit. Um, and So it's entirely possible that basically Ben Goertzel's crime that I blocked him for was less of a crime than what I was doing at around that time, um, um, unwittingly, but that's not really an excuse, right? Um, and so I should probably unblock him, right? Because this, but at the same time, I haven't like been just jumping over myself to do that because um, if a person, if that sort of misunderstanding occurred with a person who was a scientific communist, um, even if they were not a cybernetic communist, um, you know, Ben Goertzel would describe himself as a socialistic cybernetician. He has. I've heard him say that. Um, and um, but a person that's not specifically dedicated to the abolition of private wealth and openly doing so is not a person who I'm tending to give the benefit of the doubt as I would to another. Um, but it remains an open question in my mind, right? But this is a significant development, and Singularity Net generally would be, say, a large organization, not like the Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence, which is basically just two developer volunteers and a list of a few hundred people who are projected to participate but are not actively participating at this time. That's and so a limited amount of work is being put into building the people's superintelligence relative to a Singularity Net, which is not scientific communist, but nevertheless is quite large. um, and also operating more on the principles than would really be acceptable for people's superintelligence as for profit concern, right? If you ask Ben Goertzel, and I've heard him say as much as well, why are you doing that? You know, why are you doing these um, crypto rollouts? And why is your company running on this for profit thing? I say, well, that's what companies are. They run on a for profit thing. I didn't choose to live in this world where the only people running operations are running for profit concerns, but that is nevertheless the situation. And you say, okay, well, that's true. If you want to be a player, if you want to be remembered as somebody like Marvin Minsky, um, um, then that's what you would have to do. But I don't believe that for a second. I don't think you should believe that for a second. Again, calling back this a situation where you're living in a nice townhouse that you just bought. You paid a nice balloon payment for your townhouse because you've been doing crypto rollouts and other such garbage, um, or living in a tent by the freeway. Um, Irrespective of those two lifestyles, you're still 5 years away from this outcome of total human extinction or near total human extinction because of that very system that you are waving away as just a fact of life, not problematic, right? Like you could choose to live more simply, even to the point of living in a tent on the freeway, and not be complicit in that omnicidal project if you wanted to. Any of you could. And most of you are worse than Ben Goertzel in this, right? Because Ben Goertzel is maybe rolling out things that would tend to support people's superintelligence. What the fuck are you doing, right? You're just driving around in an SUV and eating cheeseburgers right now and thinking to yourself, man, I wish I could do something about this world where people driving around in SUVs and eating cheeseburgers are killing the planet. Like you're still fucking doing it. Like fuck you, right? All due respect, fuck you. um, and that's really true of every European descended person. Um, I was reading some books by Michael Parenti recently, books that I hadn't read yet, and one of these in the early days when people started to really confront the problems of the capitalist climate apocalypse, he's describing people who are still driving around in SUVs and eating cheeseburgers as kind of victim, right? They're a victim of the system, right? But that was before we could say we have this ticking time bomb scenario, right? So Michael Parenti is not a perfect person as a scientific communist. He is legitimately a scientific communist who's made articulated and made contributions to scientific communist thought. But his imperfection there probably could be boiled down to one word: land back. He's not centering the fourth world or even the third world. Um, that's to say, marginalized states or people or stateless peoples of the indigenous kind to the degree that he should. And the fourth world of the United States is particularly something that he should be mentioning, right? He should be talking about land back. But this term hadn't even been coined when he wrote a lot of his books. And I've seen him in his books making just kind of using in passing phrases that would tend to be a little bit diminishing of Native people. Right? He used the term cowboys and Indians, that sort of thing, right? Like that's settler, that's crazy settler talk. Um, and so um, but this I still would tend to recommend some of his books, but I think you should say this. You should always say the thing which is true. Um, um, and another person whose books I've been reading lately is Ernst Mandel, a person of an earlier generation than Perry Anderson or even um, um, Michael Parenti, who's quite elderly now, who's with us. And I think if you were to ask Michael Parenti now about this, and I think maybe even I saw a transcript of an interview to that effect, he would say, I wish that I'd said more along the lines of line back. Scientific communists will, when confronted with their mistakes, will do self-crit and say, I'm sorry for that, I will try. And that's generally the difference between a person who's purporting to be a communist but is not, like people from the American Communist Party that's become a kind of ridiculous meme of recent months, and real scientific communists, and they're not. They're crypto-fascists for the most part. Not everybody who has done anything with that organization is absolutely, a CIA asset, like a lot of the people who are more public-facing there. But they are a crypto-fascists of specific kinds of ideologies that would be associated with things putatively communistic, but actually anti-communistic ideologically, like Dugin or LaRouche. Um, those being the um, two big ones, two of the big ones there for these MAGA communists. And generally, the problem there is the being dismissive of the problematic nature of the so-called red-brown alliance. Right? And Reds are communists, Browns are fascists, or capitalists, and communists. It would seem logical if you're kind of drunk to say, oh well, you should try to work with people even if they're not exactly like you. But that's a lie, right? The Red Brown Alliance, the actual Red Brown Alliance, is convincing those people who are not CIA assets, who are not just completely lost souls, operating bad faith. But the people who are merely misguided on this point, convincing them to become scientific communists. That's that's what you would do with the Browns, right? Um, at best, that's what you would do with them. Not ally with them and allow them to sabotage your people's revolution and turn it into something populistic that would not serve to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. To turn it into something CIA run that would absolutely undermine that outcome. But at best, your best hope there is to convince the ones who are real human beings to also become comrades, true comrades. I've had people, so many people like this pissing in my ear. The Red Brown Alliance. But um, um, so there's contrast that some of that to someone like Ernst Mandel, who's a serious Trotskyist, a thinker who's made contributions to scientific communist thought comparable to that, at least, of a more mainline a person like um, Michael Parenti. Even though a lot of this person is just making their whole personality hating Joseph Stalin, and that is fundamentally while the Trotskyist is not a person who absolutely is a CIA asset, that is a person who is incorporating CIA fraud and sabotage into their thinking, right? Like the CIA published a paper internally, that is, that said we don't think that Stalin was an autocrat. We don't. We just kind of used this trope of Oriental despotism and these other tropes of anti-communist kind to legitimize state socialism and to delegitimize it. And that is what the CIA does. And when millions of people get tricked by that kind of sabotage, that's not so good. But I read a lot of Trotskyists in spite of that, because of this orientation toward a world revolution, and revolution in every land. That is in itself not problematic, in my view, as something to work toward if you have a means to work toward it, like say building a people's superintelligence to supplant the actual problematic factors there, right? When if you say to a Trotsky, like Trotsky, the actual person of Trotsky was a very intelligent person and did legitimately good work, just as Ernst Mandel did legitimately good intellectual labor. But the thing that he wanted more than anything was to be in charge of the problematic state socialism that his followers then made their whole personality of decrying. He wanted to be in charge of that himself. Now you say, oh, well, if he had been, then it would have been less centralized. It would have been more actual Soviets. The Soviet Union actually never really had the Soviet councils as first described. And so continuing to call them Soviet councils quite misleading. And that's a whole book. It's a whole nother conversation. But this, I said this in the context of other books that I did not recommend. I usually link to a couple of books and try to link to a lot of the books if they're good books that I reference, audiobook form, because I read a lot of audiobooks. I consider that reading, and I consider that habit of basically just always having a serious theory work on audiobook playing at all times as a thing that's transformed my intellectual life. And if I'm ever to play some role in actually building this thing, the people's superintelligence, I would say it's specifically because more than any other one person, this person, uh, uh, Christy Mullery Books, who uploads all of these audiobooks to a YouTube channel that I'm able to listen to. more so than any one thinker who's influenced me, or me sainted mother, or people who influenced me in a positive direction at earlier times, like Ben Goertzel, um, or Eri Askarol. Um, those are two people that I've known in real life who definitely challenged me to want to become a cybernetic communist. Um, and um, although I don't know them very well, right? I said I met Ben Goertzel once or twice. I've had limited real interactions with him. Kind of the more significant interactions that I've had with him were a kind of thing, kind of along the line of the Barack Obama bit, right? Like making a meme about um, AI communism and sharing it with him in the public forum, and then people being like, "Oh, that's funny," like that's not really like to say that we're really friends. But some of these interactions and his body of work itself did challenge me in that way. And similarly, Uri Askarol, um, um, another person uh, working on decentral planning, AI run decentral planning. These two people would be AI run decentral planners effectively. And um, um, it's important, I think, to drill down on the difference between socialistic central planning and socialistic decentral planning. With again, without getting into the weeds, like I can say that I read a lot of Trotskyist writers because I want to understand strategies for building this open source large language model workgroup that has this effect of stopping the capitalistic climate apocalypse before it's too late. I could just say, oh, I'm not going to read that because some of those people were kind of operating as CIA assets at some point, and so fuck them. But that's not really being too goal oriented, right? That's being ideological. And so similarly, if you're talking about the central planner versus central planner, I don't agree with either of those two people that I just mentioned who um, on the both of those people, in my humble opinion, um, Gertzel and Askarol, are people who will tend to focus on um, the state as being um, the primary contradiction rather than financial capital as being the primary contradiction. And that's the difference generally between an anarchist and a communist. And but again, we have 4 years to build this thing powerful enough to stop financial capital and empire from killing us all. And so saying I'm not going to work on anything because of a purity test in these contexts specifically can itself be the more problematic choice. Can be, but really you don't. The main thing you always would want to do in any such context is not let somebody rat fuck your operation. um, like I mentioned the United States Transhumanist Party being like CIA run, right? If I had stayed with them and tried to build people's superintelligence with them, right? Like that would have just been an unwise thing to do because any people's superintelligence, if it grew to any, started to grow to the size or scope of being a transformative thing, and that's when those think tank rats and CIA ops would jump in and neuter the thing or turn it into the thing more firmly in the financial capital and empire camp. Um, and you can basically assume that if when you see something that is large and public facing in the US that would seem to have revolutionary potential, that there's sleeper agents like that kind within the operation, and they're often getting together with their CIA handler type person saying, should we pull the plug on this? And they say, no, let's wait. They're having this kind of conversation pretty regularly. Um, and uh, well, I guess I should maybe try to do some sort of half serious talk here. Um, the um, this 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 kind of dialogue about building this truly open AI, right? Not the misnomer, this for-profit abomination, imperialistic intertwined abomination of the company called OpenAI, which is an excellent example of that sabotage, right? There was a couple of people who wanted to build an AI safety board and support things like truly open source AI agents. But they made the mistake of letting of having CIA mega assets and CIA operatives like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk in their midst, and other people like this. And so their work was immediately turned into a thing which made them some money. Those people would probably be multimillionaires now, but absolutely did not advance the project of open source AI agents transforming our world into a livable world, as they said they wanted to do. And so again, we're constantly beset by all of these kinds of contradictions, things where in just one slightly different context, you would say it's might be problematic, but it's workable, and in another context, you would say it's you're setting yourself up to fail. We're constantly surrounded by such things in the many thousands, and so this is why you would make the study of dialectical materialism, because if you're not even at the point of being intellectually honest enough to assess any of that, you're certainly not going to be able to avoid such pitfalls. You're going to be like that person who was in good faith working for the OpenAI organization and who's now just kind of scratching their head like, what happened? How come this is now just CIA bullshit? What the fuck? You know? Like, you wouldn't be saying what the fuck if you were a scientific communist. And you also probably wouldn't be multimillionaire, but again, who cares, right? It doesn't matter if you live in a tent or live in a nice penthouse when your species is going to be dead in a few years. Um, and well, I had some other notes to talk about um, advanced computing mass collaboration, this favorite subject of ours, in the context of things like Singularity Net or other projects integrating with the people's superintelligence. Right? It doesn't matter if Ben-Zion specifically spearheads the Vanguard network for people's superintelligence, or whether people's superintelligence is built as long as it's built in such a way that it won't be sabotaged by the forces of empire and financial capital. And But I do want to end by saying that this is an important project. Aside the it's relatively unambitious in the face of an AI takeoff, even to aspire to merely stopping the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse. That's one thing that could be done that would derive from this. We could stop the murder of billions of people in the global south by the global north. The most offensive white supremacist undertaking, more offensive than a white supremacist undertaking of centuries past, in my opinion. This capitalist climate apocalypse, as I said, trebly punished. The Filipinos are trebly punished, right? They've been victims over and over again of empire, and now are dying and being displaced in great number, as are people in Southeast Asia and so many other places, being displaced in great number because the United States just basically says nobody gets to have a real government. Right? We don't have a real government, and we're going to fight to see that you don't have a real government. All of that is to maintain the supremacy of financial capital, the primary contradiction. But nevertheless, there's this massive infrastructure of a more imperialistic kind than financial capital is on its face to maintain all of that. This is something that in reading Mondale, of the 80s, Mondale, he's saying, he said it's possible for empire to be removed from the equation of financial capital. It's possible for financial capital to exist without military industrial complexes. And that would seem to be kind of a smart thing for Ernst Mondale to say. And oftentimes I'm having difficulty recalling if he said that sort of ironically or not. But um, um, the point is, without these forces undermining any socialistic formation, any humane and sustainable formation, not just state forms, at every turn, right? Philippines just getting tapped and tapped and tapped in the ass over and over again, right? This is just something that the United States has done thousands and thousands of times, not just to open coups that are acknowledged, but any time a couple of teachers getting together and talking about water rights, tap, thousands and thousands of times. Um, 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 to the extent where we can demonstrably, I think, say that some of these things, like the destruction of Chile's cybersyn, Salvador Allende had built, along with many, many good people, not just cyberneticians, but including many talented cyberneticians. Some Chilean cyberneticians are still with us. Um, and Stafford Beer, who, like Salvador Allende, is no longer with us. But unlike Stafford Beer, unlike Salvador Allende, he died many years later in his bed, an old man. Salvador Allende was effectively murdered by fascists, and effectively murdered by the fascist United States. And I take great umbrage when people say, "Oh, the United States is not fascist." Fascism requires a very specific aesthetic and a slightly more articulated state form. I mean, if a person is installed hundreds and hundreds of those more articulated state forms, what would you say but that they are the fascist archfiend behind world fascism? And that's true of the United States. And that's true particularly as it relates to an AI takeoff, because the building of a technological planned economy, the Cybersyn project, was a rudimentary but a viable technological planned economy that was being built, would have been a springboard to some other permutation of a people's superintelligence, say not immediately involving machine learning as we understand it, not immediately involving large language models as we understand it, but still a springboard was being built by 1973 to building cybernetic socialism across many nations and lands, and that was destroyed by the United States. And that's the one thing where we can pretty clearly point to the stymieing by the technofascist of the techno-socialistic outcome. But at every turn, all of those thousands of sabotages, all of those times where a couple of teachers who were talking about water rights just disappeared because fuck those brown people, right? The United States will just kill people in another country just because fuck them, right? They're not Europeans, so fuck them. And where it's like the difference between the European ruling elite's approach to the punishment of Nazi war criminals, right? Stalin said we have to kill 100,000 Nazi war criminals, and Churchill said kill 100,000 Nazi war criminals. But these are European people. God damn it! Can't kill 100,000 European people in a show of. What does that say about the European paradigm that I'm a part of? What does that say about the Eurocentric paradigm that I'm a part of? Right? But they'll pretty happily just destroy every civilian infrastructure form and kill million plus people in all of Japan. Destroyed almost every building in urban areas in Japan, killing a million plus people. Right? What's the difference between those two situations? Punishing the Nazis versus destroying all of Japan. That's the Eurocentric paradigm, and that Eurocentric paradigm is a guiding element of this military-industrial complex-run world of the United States. So when there's a couple of teachers talking about water rights in Sweden, the United States doesn't go into Sweden and kill them. But when there's a couple of teachers in Indonesia together talking about water rights, oh, they're dead. Those people are dead. The United States killed through this proxy war and sabotage, not open warfare on the part of the United States, but nevertheless did murder more than 1 million people in Indonesia. All of those people were just teachers and things like this. None, literally, almost none of them had a gun in their hand. Those 1 million people that were murdered by the fascist United States. And you would say that of every of the 300 million, practically every of the 300 million people that the United States has murdered, according to the book Endless Holocaust. And you can pretty easily account for all of that, right? It shouldn't be controversial. It's only controversial if you literally just when confronted with incontrovertible facts, just put your head up your ass. Like that's the only reason any of that would be controversial is because you're ignoring it. You know, well, this these projects beyond stopping the effects going forward of the capitalist climate apocalypse, we can't completely reverse all of the effects, but we can stop them. Um, um, this is one of the things that we could do, like the artwork that I made this week. That is more, had some thousands of eyes on it, I think, or hundreds at least. It got shared a few times, and so more people got eyes on it. But it describes this outcome of universal super longevity as being a feature of the people's superintelligence. So beyond merely stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse is the implication, and even affects well beyond universal super longevity, transforming society when human immiseration is a thing of the past, when financial capital is a thing of the past. Those are the same problem. Then transforming this into a spacefaring species, pushing up the Kardashev scale, building other AI takeoff effects that we can scarcely anticipate at this point. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my dear comrade, very soon, cybernetic communism will win.